Hey guys, this is Comic Uno, and today I'm doing Comic Uno's Best Comics of the Week, and this is a show where I review all the comics I've read this week in one show. We go least favorite to best pick of the week and everything in between. So before we get started, we do have the viewer's pick of the week, so in the comments below, let me know your pick of the week for a chance to be featured on the episode. Now, I also have a pretty big haul this week, so just to show you what this haul looks like, let's pick this up here. Look at that. Look at that fat stack. It's a big haul. Mostly Marvel books this week. But let's jump into it. I have 15 books. So number 15 for me is Hexware issue 1. And this one I kind of got on whim. I'm a Tim Seeley fan, and I thought it was an interesting cover, pretty much. Like, this cover looks pretty cool. And then, you know, witches and science. I'm like, all right, how does that go together? That's a cool concept. So I was like, let me try this one out. And, you know, it just wasn't for me. I didn't love the vibe of it. I'm not usually into magic or science. I think it's mostly because I thought the character design looked really cool. And again, I do like Tim Seeley's Revival. I think it's a great book, but couldn't truly get into this one. So overall, giving that 1.5 stars, and that is number 15. Moving on to number 14. And number 14 for me is Spider-Man issue 3. There's a ton of Spider-Man books out this week. And Spider-Man, the Dan Slott book, I really enjoyed that first issue. I was like, all right, cool. Let's see what direction we're going to end up going with this one. And the second issue is kind of what more I expected from Spider-Verse. It felt very crowded. I didn't really know the direction of why we needed another Spider-Verse, and issue 3 continues to do that. There's just way too many characters. I also just felt like there was too many word balloons. It was hard to get into the art because of it. And like I said, I just don't know if there's a true direction to this book. So, and with so many Spider-Man books that are out. So giving that 1.5 stars, and that is number 14. Moving on to number 13, which is Thor, issue 29. And I don't want to say this is a fill arc, but because there actually is movement, but this does definitely take a little bit of a sidestep because we do have a guest writer who I love. I think Torin's a wonderful writer, and Donny Cates, I think, is taking a little break, and then we'll have him return. But I actually was surprised there was some good plot progression here for a story that was more focused on Runa, and that is why it's a little lower for me. I'm not a huge Runa fan. I've always wanted to enjoy the character, but I just haven't been able to get into her, and this is very much a Runa story. But I like the ending of this issue. We get to see Thor's grandfather, which is pretty interesting. You obviously have Nick Klein's artwork, which is gorgeous, and it's cool to see Torin's writing with Nick's artwork, and again, getting more of Runa's story in the flagship book of Thor. So overall, it was more lower because it's just not my style, the character, but I do think it was interesting to see what type of movement was happening in this book. So overall, giving that 2.5 stars, and that is number 13. Moving on to number 12, which is a book I was really looking forward to, and that is Miles Morales issue 1. And action-wise, I thought this is a really good book. Like, the action just blew my mind. I really loved the style, but maybe there was too much action in this issue, because I feel like the weight of why I should care about Miles in this run didn't really happen. I felt like it was very similar to the previous run, and I love Miles. I've been reading Miles since his first appearance. I love the character, but I feel like he kind of lost something when he came to the regular universe that I still think they're trying to catch. And even though we have some of the supporting characters here, we have Miles's parents, we have Ganke, there just doesn't feel to be that spark for me, to say, ooh, this is a cool new direction, even with the new villain introduced here. But I do think the artwork does showcase some, like I said, interesting visuals, maybe want me to get a second issue, but story-wise, I'm not seeing a fresh take on the character. So overall, giving that 2.5 stars. Actually, I think it might be 3. Let me see. That one's 2.5 stars, and that is number 12. Moving on to number 11, a book I don't want to say I got on a whim, but I was on the fence. I didn't know if I was going to get this or not, and that is Gargoyles issue 1. And Gargoyles, I like the TV show. Do I love the TV show this many years later? I've kind of forgotten about the TV show. But it's back, and there's such a hardcore fan base for this book, these characters. So I was like, all right, let me see what's going on. And I feel like it it kind of tried leaning in two directions, right? There was a section where it's like, all right, if you never read Gargoyles before, we want you to know these characters. And then there's another section where it's like, here's this character that showed up maybe in season 3 of Gargoyles. And I feel like it should have leaned in one direction or the other. Be completely just, just for the fans, or be new reader friendly. Because I feel like it was kind of missing some heart because it tried playing two directions. I couldn't latch onto it as much as I wanted to. The artwork, though, I really think fit very well for a 2022-2023 audience, which I really liked. It felt different from the 90s stuff, or, the 90s animation, but still gave... It felt familiar enough, and it felt clean, and it felt some of the good emotions here. So overall, giving that 2.5 stars. I don't know if I'll get issue 2, but I'm glad I gave it a shot. Moving on to number 10. I think we're up to number 10. Let me see. Yes, number 10. I mixed up my order here. One of my books got out of order. I actually re-recorded this video because my mic wasn't working. So that is why this is disorganized. Sorry about that. But yes, moving on to number 10, which is Daredevil issue 6. And this issue was more point A to point B than that previous issue that I really liked. There's some good movement. We're obviously building to maybe even a big event with Punisher, especially by the end. And there's some interesting moral questions that Daredevil has to go through, because he is teaming up with the villain. But he's like, am I making a prison? Am I the bad guy? Am I putting people in the position that I was in just a previous arc ago? And I find that fascinating. I don't know if it drove the issue as much as I wanted to, but I think it gave enough information to see where this arc ends up going. I think it will become more important as the arc continues, especially obviously the last part with Punisher. And the artwork's gritty, it's good, it's fun. So overall, giving that 3 stars, and that is number 10. Moving on to number 9, which is The Ones, issue 2. And I really was pleasantly surprised with issue 1. I think it was some of Bendis's best work. And with this issue, what I liked about the first issue is that we got to see the ensemble really played out. We actually got to see notes from each and every character and be like, oh, cool, I could like that character, I could like that character. This issue just focuses on the one character who kind of brought everyone together and has the hero's journey to tell everybody their prophecies and tell them like why they're connected to the world. And that kind of doesn't work out for him in this issue. The thing I liked about it was his past. I enjoyed learning about him. I love the cartooniness of the book. The thing I didn't love is kind of what Bendis tends to do, which is try to throw everything at the fan in one issue. We get to see the world ending, we get to see the devil appear, we get to see this guy's backstory, and kind of wanted it slowed down a little bit like that first issue, which I thought was better paced. So overall, giving that 3 stars, and that is number, I think that was number 9. So moving on to number 8, which is also our main topic of the video, and that is Dark Web, issue 1. And this is, a book I'm on the fence with, because I think as an event, it's one of the better events. You actually get to see it connected to things that have been happening in Spider-Man, and there seems to be some movement in that regard. It's mostly setting up the villains. So Madeline Pryor, who's teaming up with Ben Reilly, and topic of our video, teaming up with Venom. And Venom's kind of, at first, just say, hey, I want to help my son, which definitely is in line with who Venom is. And then in the end, somehow we kind of get this 360 of he wants to eat Peter Parker and eat Spider-Man. I'm like, oh, okay, wow, okay, that's more villain Venom than we're used to. And I think that's something I, love and hate about mainstream comics, I would say, the Marvel, the big two, where, you get some really wonderful character development with Venom in particular, and we'll just use Venom as an example, who's become a hero, who's kind of found his own as a character with Donny Cates' run. I'm not currently reading Venom, so I don't know what's going on in that series, but I hate that sometimes you have to put it back to the status quo of, okay, Venom has to be a villain again. It's like, does he? Is he more interesting as a villain, or is he more interesting as Eddie Brock, the father, who plays an anti-hero? And maybe they'll lean more towards the anti-hero stuff as the volume goes on, and he'll switch places. But right now, he's kind of in the team and talking more to the villains. So I don't know. I that was the part I was a little weary about. And also, the Mary Jane and Peter stuff, as always, it's kind of it's frustrating, I think is the word I'm trying to find, where, you know, it's cool, finally we get to see Peter and MJ interact, and then half of it's off panel and no progression happens, literally nothing. They're like, oh, you want to find out about the kids? We're not going to do that here. And it's like, will we ever get answers for that, or are you just continuing the tease? So that was a little frustrating, but I felt like the opening with Ben was good. I'm interested to see where the story goes, and hey, I'm invested. I want to see where issue 2 goes, which tends not to happen with me and events. So overall, giving that one 3.5 stars, and that is number 8. Moving on to number 7, which is Captain America, issue 7. And, you know, I'm not a hardcore Captain America fan, but I like this series. I think the artwork is crisp for this one. I really, really like the art. I don't know if the plot moved as much in this one, but we get some good moments with Steve as a person, right? Him hanging out with Carter. We get to see the team kind of form of maybe these good guys are going to go up against what's forming with with Bucky, and especially what we saw in that last issue, and then AIM gets involved in the end, which, as someone who's not a hardcore Captain America fan, I'm like, all right, whatever with that, but I enjoyed the character moments here. Even though I don't know if it's as strong as previous issues, I still think there's a lot to enjoy here. So giving that one 3.5 stars, and that is number 7. Moving on to number 6, which is Fantastic Four, issue 2. So a bit higher than that previous issue, and mostly because I like Sue. I think she's a great character. It's pretty much the same thing that happens. You know, they're kind of off into, I want to say, this almost WandaVision story, or at least with Doombots, and they got to figure out why they're there and, you know, who's behind it. And it was fun to see Reed and Sue interact and fight alongside together. I don't know if I'm completely sold on this series yet. I don't know if it really blew my mind. It was also interesting to see Sue start the story with, hey, Jen, I miss you, and then it doesn't really talk about Jen at all by the end, and Jen being She-Hulk. So I thought that would be weaved through the issue a little bit more. But overall, like I said, I enjoyed this one more. I like Sue. I like some of the action here. And very, very excited to see what they're going to do with the Human Torch. So that'll be issue 3. And I give that 3.5 stars. That is number 6. Moving on to number 5, which is Radiant Pink, issue 1. And Radiant Pink, for me, I love that first issue. It's one of my favorite Radiant Black issues. And I like this character a lot. I like what she has to offer. And I feel like this issue, compared to, like I was saying with Gargoyles, where I was like, oh, where was the emotion for that one? And I think that that's something I wanted more from. And then Miles Morales was similar. It's like, oh, there's some plot progression or, you know, some plot setup, but where's the emotion? And I think Radiant Pink does that really well, where you get the emotion of this character and the character journey of her just wanting to be a hero, her literally losing sleep over it just to, I don't know if it's to be a good person, but at least to help people. And then she gets stuck on another portal, another dimension, it seems like, with this woman she doesn't know, who in the end we find out might not be a great person, and literally kind of has to take a break because she's not in this world anymore. I just thought it was a really good setup. I liked the character. I was a little confused by the end. We'll see how that gets explained further. I think the artwork is solid. I do think some of the colors are a little darker than you expect for a book called Radiant Pink, but I do think it would have done better with some, you know, brighter colors throughout the palette. But overall, I like the book. I think it's solid and very much looking forward to seeing where issue 2 goes. So that is number 5. And I gave that 4 stars. Moving on to number 3, you know, a book I referenced before, and that is Punisher. I was talking about that with Daredevil because it seems like they're going to do some sort of crossover. And this issue, you know, what's so funny, I like the past stuff more than anything. Like, I like Maria's story a lot. I think she's a super interesting character. I love her voice, and I like that we don't really know what's going to happen with her because she's such an unknown entity. She's not someone who's usually in Punisher. She's one talked about, but never as her own character. So you're like, oh, what direction she's going to go as Punisher is kind of building this own war outside of her. There's always this kind of like personal string with her, and the artwork's really gritty and nice for the past. I still like the present a lot too, and I think it works for the present, but I'm just really interested in Maria's story. So overall, giving that 4 stars. I think every issue I'm enjoying her character more and more, even though this is a Punisher book. I'm still enjoying Punisher too. I think there's some interesting battles happening here and some interesting progression, but Maria is the rock star for me. So that is number 4, and I gave that 4 stars. Moving on to number 3, which is X-Treme X-Men, issue 1. I'm a huge Kitty Pryde fan, so that's why I picked it up. Did not know it was going to continue the Wolverine and Kitty Pryde miniseries, which is one of my favorite comic books of all time. So to see such a focus on it, I was like, whoa, this feels like a sequel to that book, because Ogun, who is supposed to be dead, and I think they do a good job explaining what happened in that book if you'd never read it, without it feeling boring, without being like, I've read it, I don't need this. They do a really good job at throwing some more emotional weight with the explaining, and be like, I'm explaining this to kind of relive what Kitty is going through and what she had gone through and why this is such a powerful story. And it did a great job. You know, Ogun might still be alive and still wants to possess Kitty. That's the story, and her friends are going to try helping, and we get to see an edgier version of her. We get a very psychological story, which is what I enjoyed about that first miniseries, and I just think it's such a good predecessor, which, you know, obviously Chris Claremont wrote both, so it makes a lot of sense, and I don't think he skipped a beat here. The only reason it's not a little higher is I think there's some awkward positions in the artwork. The facial expressions are kind of weird sometimes, like the characters are placed weirdly, but I still like the overall style when those movements are a little bit more cohesive. So overall, giving that 4 stars. Very excited to see where issue 2 goes. So that's number 3 for me. Number 2, which I think is the best issue since the premiere of this creative team, and that is Batman issue 130. It's the last part of this arc, and we get to see Batman is in space and has to go back to Earth. There's a bit of a Mary Sue moment, I would say, where, you know, Batman does everything just as Batman to get back to Earth. But honestly, it was so fun and cool and reminded me of Gravity enough that I could look over and was like, all right, could even Batman do this? But there's a good Superman moment trying to fight Failsafe. I thought that was good. And then the ending is what really made it for me, where we get to see Failsafe kills Batman, but really he's like transported into this other place that kind of looks like Crime Alley. And you're like, okay, Tim thinks that Batman's dead. Where is Batman actually going? Where's the story going? And then, yeah, I just thought it was a really well done action issue that also had character first. And, you know, it's always a balancing act. Again, going back kind of to that Miles Morales issue of like, there's wonderful action, but where's the character moments? And I think Batman did a better job at that balancing act. So overall, giving that 4.5 stars, and that is number 2. Moving on to number 1. If you guys follow this show, I think you know this is going to be number 1, and that is Do a Powerbomb, issue 7, the last issue of this book. And if you have not picked up Do a Powerbomb, do yourself a favor, get the trade when it comes out, because this is honestly such a perfect book, and I don't use perfect lightly. And this issue was so well done. You know, I was a little scared as I was like halfway through. I'm like, oh, they're still battling. Honestly, I would say 3/4 of the way through. It was like, I'm so much ingrained in this fight between our duo and God of all people. But I'm like, how is this going to wrap up? And then you get to the ending where Lona remembers her mother. You know, her mother obviously doesn't come back. That's not this story, even though that's what they've been chasing for and this grief has been chasing for. But that's not how life works. And there's this really interesting part where Lona's mom is like, well, wrestling and death are kind of similar, where, you know, we know the ending of wrestling, but why do we love it so much if we know the ending? It's like, well, because the journey, that's what's important. And that's caps it all off. And just thematically, it's like, whoa, that's such a great full circle where, yes, wrestling's a big part of this book, but really the story has always been about family and life and what you do with your life and this bigger story about death, you know, and that's literally what they've been fighting for is, you know, the mom to be alive, and they couldn't do that, and that was okay. And really the journey was for these two to get closer. So I love this book. I just think the ending was so good, and I could talk forever about, again, why this is a perfect book. But beginning, middle, and end, every single time it topped itself from the action, which, again, I don't think I talked enough that they fought God. And it was so interesting and fun to watch as just, like, again, the more wrestling side of things, and then really hit with emotion in those last 3 or 4 pages, which I was shocked how they could kind of bring that all together in such a little limited amount of time. The perfect book, 5 stars for me, and that is number 1. Hopefully you guys enjoyed. This is Comic Uno. Let me know in the comments below what are your favorite books from this week, your pick of the week. And last week, the viewer's pick of the week was JSA, and here are some comments about that. Hopefully you guys enjoyed. This is Comic Uno, and I will see you guys in the next one. Bye.